At the beginning of the movie, our protagonist witnesses his sister performing an experiment on a sword, which fails disastrously, resulting in her slow transformation into a different creature. He is helpless to save her, as his master also falls unconscious from the failed experiment. His sister gradually turns into a dragon and flies away. Nearby wizards attempt to attack the dragon, but he defends his sister, allowing her to escape. This continent has existed for thousands of years, originally inhabited by dwarves who were hunted by dragons to the point they had to flee to the continent's edges. Then, wizards were born, and humans began to populate the land. 5 years after the movie's opening events, our main character now goes by the name Orphan and is on a mission to catch 2 kids who borrowed money from him and haven't paid him back. He uses magic to capture them and demands repayment. But when they claim they are broke, he roughs them up. Meanwhile, a royal policewoman is also after the same kids for being wanted criminals. She throws 2 darts that accidentally hit a bystander, causing Orphan to intervene. The kids use the distraction to escape, while the policewoman, realizing her mistake and the darts were laced with a sedative, asks Orphan to help treat the injured bystander. She recognizes him as an expelled wizard, prompting Orphan to recall those days. Orphan then heads to his favorite tavern to eat. The tavern owner's son, Magic, is excited because Orphan is a wizard. However, the owner cautions that there are many fake wizards outside deceiving people, but Orphan is authentic, as evidenced by his dragon-shaped necklace, a mark given to wizards by the Tower Fang. Magic's mother was a wizard too, so Orphan thinks he might have magical potential as well. Magic expresses a desire to learn magic from Orphan, who in turn demands tuition fees, causing the owner to ask Orphan not to exploit the fact that he's a regular to rope his son into magic. But Orphan sees potential in magic due to his passion and wizard lineage. Suddenly, the 2 kids reappear, wanting to strike a deal with Orphan as a condition for paying him back. He then has to dress up elegantly and accompany them on a task. Orphan notices that there are few people on the streets, and the bespectacled kid explains that there have been some shady dealings recently, causing people to rarely venture outside. Meanwhile, the wizards are still hunting the dragon that Orphan's sister transformed into. She, seeing her former master among them, decides to retreat without attacking. Orphan is led by the 2 kids to a noble's house under false pretenses. Upon hearing that Orphan is a noble involved in the sleep potion business, the noble and his mother excuse themselves to go out. From the start, Orphan is clueless about the plan, but finds himself dragged into a mess of fabrications and starts to struggle. Suddenly, the noble's daughter enters and reveals that she has overheard everything and knows the 3 are fraudsters. The kids pretend to have been brainwashed by Orphan. Orphan proves he is a wizard, prompting the girl to recall that a wizard from the Tower Fang had visited her father years ago, but her father passed away 2 years ago. She vaguely remembers that the visitor was muscular with black hair tied back. Orphan's master had also followed the dragon to this town. The girl informs Orphan that 5 years ago, a man fitting the description she gave had come here and left a sword with them. Suddenly, the dragon flies toward the mansion where Orphan and the group are. He follows the daughter to a warehouse where her mother and sister are hiding. He uses magic to open the door, coming face to face with the dragon, who is also his sister. But she disregards her younger brother and breathes fire to destroy a box and retrieve the sword. As the wizards arrive and attack the dragon outside, Orphan rushes to defeat them, protecting his sister just as he had done years ago. He uses magic once more to block their spells. The dragon then breathes fire at Orphan, who counters the attack with a technique to neutralize it. Flashing back to the past, in the northern part of the continent is the Tower Fang, where wizards gather to live and train together. The strongest among them is Childman and his disciples. Orphan was once one of the 5 disciples of Childman, who only taught his students to use their best spells against him, though he easily neutralized every technique. Orphan's sister, Azaleen, known as the Chaotic Wizard, loved to disrupt her friends and was Childman's most talented student. Her techniques were so powerful they could shake the surroundings, yet Childman's magic could still block them. Orphan wanted her to restrain herself, but she preferred being serious about her craft, which led to her receiving her 50th reprimand from her teacher. Later, Azaleen asked Orphan to write the reprimand for her. She disliked writing, so he wanted her to cause less trouble to avoid it. Their friends also advised Azaleen to minimize disruptions, as other classes had complained about Childman's class, and further trouble might lead to their dissolution. A young man in the class, known for his nonsensical inventions, brought in the new robot he had created. Orphaned then took it upon himself to destroy these nonsensical inventions. Despite often causing trouble for others, their class was a lively and teasing bunch. Back in the present, Orphaned finds himself in jail with the two kids who are actually dwarves. He could easily escape but doesn't want to become a wanted criminal, so he stays. Both he and the dragon are wizards from the Tower Fang, a place mostly inhabited by orphans. Orphaned had been searching for a way to turn Azaleen back into a human. Just as he was about to give up, Azaleen reappeared, motivating him to find the spell she used to reverse her condition. An old friend, Hartia, arrives to summon Orphaned to meet his teacher. Orphaned dresses in his old clothes, and Hartia is surprised to find him here. Hartia, who is now a secretary in the town, acknowledges how much Orphaned has changed. Upon meeting his teacher, he notes that 5 years have passed. 5 years ago, when his teacher was still unconscious, all the wizards decided to hold a funeral. Orphaned was furious, believing they were denying Azalee's existence and rejecting her by conducting this funeral. Orphaned smashed the empty coffin, declaring Azalee as the most powerful wizard ever known at the Tower Fang, and vowed to find her at any cost. If they wanted to bury anyone, they should bury him instead. He discarded his old name and adopted the name Orphaned in his quest to find Azalee. Hartia tried to stop him because he was the best in their class, but he was only at the top because Azaleen never took tests. The teacher revealed that he and Azaleen had conducted an experiment that activated the sword, but the sword went out of control and turned Azaleen into a dragon. Orphaned questioned why the sword was here. The teacher had entrusted it to a student for safekeeping before falling unconscious. That student had brought the sword here to be stored by a noble family. It seemed the dragon's instinct to revert to human form had led it here to retrieve the sword. Sheldman explained that to capture Azaleen, a master of both dark and light magic, they would need a dark wizard skilled in combat like Orphaned. He refused to help them kill Azalee. The teacher didn't press him, but mentioned he was the best person he could rely on. Hartia suggested that Orphaned could restore his reputation and return to the Tower Fang if he helped them, but Orphaned was still reluctant. Sheldman revealed that he had placed a tracker on the sword before the dragon took it, so if Orphaned didn't join him, he would never see Azalee again. The teacher planned to leave that night, inviting Orphaned to come if he wished. Orphaned then returned to the inn to pack his things. He promised Magic he would return soon to pay his rent. Afterward, he went to the noble's house to repair the warehouse for them. The daughter paid him with a magic ring, which Orphaned recognized as Azaleen's. It had an enchantment that could block a single attack. Knowing the ring had been sent here along with the sword, Orphaned decided to set out to find Azaleen. He planned to save her and help her escape before the other wizards could harm her. He then set out and joined up with other wizards. Upon meeting them, he also encountered Comicron, the young man known for his bizarre inventions back then. Comicron had changed a lot, and Orphaned knew he couldn't let past emotions interfere. He had to save Azalee at all costs. On their way, Orphaned noticed that Sheldman had brought along a white wizard to seal Azaleen. He realized that Sheldman had anticipated casualties on this journey, and was willing to accept the entire group's demise if it meant at least one of them could kill Azaleen. Meanwhile, the nobleman's daughter and the two dwarves had followed behind. The dwarves wanted to capture Azalee to sell her for money, while the daughter simply wanted to help Orphaned. Suddenly, all three were spotted by a bear and screamed. At this moment, Orphaned and his group took a break. He observed that the group consisted of powerful individuals, with Sheldman undoubtedly being the strongest. Orphaned was uncertain if he could defeat them all to save Azalee, so he decided to leave ahead of the group. Sensing Azalee's presence growing stronger, he ran towards it, shouting her name. As he felt her presence more intensely, he continued running and calling out to Azalee. Suddenly, a burst of fire scorched a swath of the forest. Thinking Azalee had cleared the path for him, he pressed on, but the dragon suddenly spewed fire towards him. Orphaned dodged desperately, realizing his power was no match for Azalee's. His only option was to raise a shield to block the attack when, at that moment, Sheldman and the other wizards caught up. Comicron arrived to heal him, while the white wizard attempted to seal Azaleen. However, before he could complete the seal, he was struck by a blast of fire and vanished. They were forced to split up and cast spells at Azaleen. Orphaned spotted the sword and decided to dash forward to seize it. He grabbed the sword and ran, with Azaleen in pursuit. Sheldman sent Hartia after Orphaned, and then Comicron was consumed by flames. Hartia caught up and informed Orphaned about Comicron's death. She argued that if Orphan had just helped them, Comicron wouldn't have died, and that his efforts were futile, since only Azaleen knew how to wield the sword properly. Orphan refused to return, leaving him no choice but to fight Harsha. She enveloped Orphan in darkness and attacked, but he countered with a spell. At that moment, the other three arrived and accidentally knocked Harsha out. Orphan helped them deal with the bear and decided to assist Harsha, feeling it was the right thing to do. When he returned, he found the dragon had dealt with everyone except Childman. Orphan came to assist Childman and together they fought back. Just as Childman found an opening to deliver a finishing blow to the dragon, Orphan intervened to block it. Angered, Childman stabbed Orphan and then unleashed a chaotic spell to completely annihilate the dragon. Afterward, he healed Orphan and let him go to the dragon's remains alone, while he and Harsha returned with the sword. Orphan seemed to hear the dragon's dying words and realized something. The next morning, he waited on the path Childman would pass. He called out for Childman to meet him, revealing that he knew who he truly was. Orphan had realized that the soul inside that body was actually Azaleen, not Childman. Exposed, Azaleen revealed herself. She knew Orphan was the only one who could see her true self, and had hoped he would one day become her ally. She confessed that she had lost consciousness and turned into a dragon after a failed experiment 5 years ago. When Childman woke up and pursued her, she realized and swapped consciousness with Childman. Not knowing where the sword was, she let him search for it. The sword could transform anyone it cut into any form, and she wanted to return to her original form and be with Orphan. However, Orphan felt betrayed by her actions and resolved to oppose her because she had killed Childman. Childman had entrusted him with this mission before his death. During their battle, Azalee thought she had struck Orphan, but missed, allowing him to counterattack. Orphan revealed he had swallowed the ring, which had indeed protected him from one blow. He declared he would take the sword, and she could keep Childman's body, although he doubted it would last long. He was about to leave with the sword, but informed Azaleen about Childman's sacrifice for her. He had pursued her to help her return to normal, and the reason he did not resist the consciousness swap was to save her. Determined to be worthy of Childman's sacrifice, Azaleen resolved to change. Orphan then left the sword behind. The film takes us back to the past, when Orphan was still at the Tower Fang, spending his days causing mischief with his friends, often accompanied by a troublesome Azalee. At that time, since Childman was rarely at the school, Tish, from the disciplinary committee, often had to manage the mischievous group. She threatened Azaleen with 100 lashes if she continued causing trouble. Orphan, although not particularly troublesome himself, was frequently reminded by Tish due to his association with Azalee. Later, Harsha rushed in to report that he had just found a few girls when Tish threatened to ban him from approaching any more girls because he would chat up anyone he met and then cling to them. At that moment, Comicron arrived. He received a punch from Tish for running in the hallway. It turned out Comicron was having trouble with one of his inventions. He led 2 friends outside, where his invention was causing problems because it could reflect magic spells. Harsha stepped forward to use a sealing spell, but it backfired and blew him away. Orphan had to step in and use light magic to restrain it, and Tish, from a higher position, sniped it to settle the matter. The next morning, Azaleen came to call Orphan for a trip together. As they boarded the carriage, he still didn't know where they were going. After a while, he realized Azaleen was taking him back to their hometown. They then returned to the old town where they had been sent to the orphanage. They revisited the orphanage they were once in. Azaleen reminisced about the day Orphan was sent there. Back then, she and Tish were still friends there and were excited when Orphan arrived. He and the 2 sisters had many memories together there. Eventually, both were sent to the Tower Fang, and he hadn't seen them again until he was also taken there. They then visited the graves of people they knew. Suddenly, when Orphan looked back, Azaleen was gone. She had entered a nearby ruined house just as Orphan walked by. He called out to Azaleen repeatedly but received no response. Suddenly, someone called his name and told him to come to the orphanage to save his sister. When he returned, the silence told him he needed to be cautious as he entered. As he stepped in, he was suddenly tripped and dropped his knife. A creature lunged at him, which he eliminated with a spell. Then, he was hit on the head by a falling bucket. As he was ascending the stairs, a towel fell on Orphan's head, startling him. Upon entering the room, he saw an image of Azalee that had been tampered with, and a ghost appeared to attack him. Orphan became angry and couldn't see the attacks since the ghost was nearly motionless. He was very worried about Azalee, But now he had only one option, and he knew the house wouldn't withstand the upcoming onslaught from the spell. He then used a spell called Soul Projection, causing the entire house to collapse. Nearby, Azaleen was taken aback as she had been outsmarted by Orphaned. That evening, she brought some items to Orphaned. He was surprised that she was unharmed, and she casually invited him back as if nothing had happened. Orphaned immediately realized that Azaleen was playing tricks on him, recalling past incidents involving a bucket and a towel orchestrated by Azaleen. She pretended ignorance, but Orphaned was very angry with Azaleen. He knew Azaleen had taken her pranks too far, and he was sure that the chaos caused by Comicron's robot was also due to Azaleen's interference. She returned the knife to Orphaned, confirming his suspicions that Azaleen was behind the tricks. Azaleen thanked Orphaned for his concern. Afterwards, they both left, and Azaleen remarked that if such an event were to really happen in the future, he should find her at all costs. Back in the present, Orphaned still remembered the time he spared Azaleen's life. She was determined to rediscover herself. Meanwhile, Orphaned knew that there were two people hiding in the back of his carriage. They were the young lady and Magic. He had known they were there since the young lady had gifted him the carriage. Orphaned asked them why they were following him. The young lady wanted to see the world and had left a note for her mother. Magic wanted to learn magic from Orphaned and would pay the tuition fees himself, having already discussed it with his father. Magic also knew the young lady as they had attended school together. Magic asked Orphaned where he planned to go, and he said he needed to return to the Tower Fang on business. On their way, they reached the Fenrir Forest. This forest was home to many dangerous creatures, and the only way to get to the Tower Fang was to pass through it. When Cleon went to bathe, she asked Magic to keep watch. However, Magic took the opportunity to use magic to peek at her. She felt like she was being watched, but Magic convinced her it was just her imagination. Orphaned had to intervene and reprimand Magic for using magic for such frivolous antics. After he left, Cleon asked what was happening on the other side. Magic, turning to say nothing was wrong, accidentally caught a glimpse of her and ended up getting a rock thrown at his head. As they continued their journey, Orphaned couldn't believe that it had taken him 3 years to master spells that Magic was picking up in just 2 weeks since he started teaching him. Clearly, the name says it all. At this rate, Magic would become a wizard within a year. Cleon noticed that Magic was starting to dress like Orphaned. Well, he was indeed wearing Orphaned's clothes. Even Cleon was wearing his pants, which she had altered to fit. They needed to cross this forest and travel for another 3 weeks to reach the Tower Fang. Orphaned took a detour to avoid an observation station, because if they were identified as wizards, they would be reported to the church. The church, a religious organization as influential as the royal family, detested wizards. That night, while camping in the forest, Orphaned noticed the food he had prepared for the journey was almost gone due to their incessant eating. Cleo claimed she could cook, but her cooking was inedible. To stop their bickering, Magic went into the forest to gather food. Then, Magic got lost and was attacked by a snake. He used a magical shield to block the snake, but a girl discovered him. After learning Magic was a wizard and had a master nearby, she advised him to leave with his master. She was being controlled by the forest and couldn't leave herself. She warned that the place was very dangerous, and they should leave as soon as possible. Her name was Fiona, and she lived in a village that outsiders could never find. Magic asked for some food from her village, but they had already arrived because Magic's group had entered the forest illegally. Fiona tried to protect Magic, and soon her people also approached Orphaned. Fiona, being a priestess of the temple, would be punished if she didn't obey them. On one side, Orphaned was resisting the villagers and protecting Cleom. On the other, Magic was being protected by Fiona. However, he cleverly cast a spell that went unnoticed, causing the snake to fall, and create a diversion, allowing them to escape. But the villagers had firearms, and Magic, caught off guard, was shot. On the other side, Orphaned used magic to defeat the villagers, and, learning that Magic had also been captured, went to rescue him. The 2 dwarves had also been captured by the village, and they were the ones who had tipped off the villagers to attack Orphaned's group. They were currently detained as forced laborers, planning their escape soon. Orphaned quickly found the village and saw that Magic was being held in a tower. He noticed the village's flag bore a dragon emblem. In this world, there are 2 faiths, the faith of the gods and the dragon faith. The dragon faith is an enemy to wizards. Cleom didn't understand why wizards, symbolized by dragons, were hated by the dragon faith, so Orphaned explained. Long ago, The 6 strongest dragon races lived together and stole magic from the gods. At the forefront was the celestial dragon race. They gave rise to humans and today's wizards, making wizards essentially half human, half dragon. Although the celestial ancestors created humans, they believed that wizards were beings who had stolen their power, thus organizing events to hunt wizards. When the celestials disappeared, the hunt ceased. But some who still held the celestials' ideology founded the dragon faith to oppose wizards. Suddenly, a surge of power erupted in the village center, and Orphaned realized it was Fenrir, the ruler of the forest. The villagers called it their master and came to worship Orphaned. Knowing he had to get past the wolf to reach the tower, he asked Cleom to go to the observation station and report the situation. Orphaned was then spotted by the village chief and targeted with a gun. He quickly ran, but was soon surrounded by villagers. Forced to retaliate with magic, he was stabbed in the arm. Then, the wolf approached from behind, asking if he was ready to make a sacrifice to gain the power needed to protect his belongings. Overwhelmed, Orphaned fainted. Meanwhile, Cleom reported to the villagers about what the wolf had told her. She only revealed what they wanted to hear, hiding the truth. She then advised Orphaned not to oppose the village chief. Orphaned later woke up in a cell. Orphaned remained silent, no matter what he was asked. Another person, Salua, arrived and identified Orphaned as a dark wizard from the Tower Fang. However, Salua believed that even a dark wizard would be no match for his gun. He announced that he would start interrogating Orphaned the next day. Salua later saw Fina bringing food to Magic. He knew she had misrepresented the wolf's words earlier but understood that she was still trying to do what was best for the village. Magic had meanwhile regained consciousness. He was surprised to be alive after being shot, thankful that Fina had managed to heal him in time. Fina lived alone in this house without parents, and her only role was to calm the villagers by appearing at the right time and saying the right things. Saving Magic was her own decision. Just then, the village chief arrived. He wanted Fina to pack her belongings as he planned for the entire village to leave. He claimed to have taken her in when she was lost in the forest. However, it was actually she who had found him, leading him to believe that the forest had granted her to him. Magic protested, insisting that she did not belong to him. When the chief drew his gun, Fina restrained him. Reluctantly, he put away the gun and told her to pack quickly. Magic was determined to take Fina with him. He then remembered that he needed to find Orphaned and Cleom, but Fina had already brought Magic to meet Orphaned in the jail. Orphaned was immobile due to Salua's mental attack, an assault he could only withstand because of his specialized training. A regular person's mind would have been shattered. Magic felt that his capture was due to his lack of skill, while he had been trying to save Fina. Orphaned knew Magic was trying to look strong in front of a girl, and thanked Fina for healing his mind earlier. Fina then returned to the tower, while Orphaned was furious that the 2 dwarves had revealed information about his group to the village, leading to their current predicament. He was about to deal with the dwarves when Magic intervened. At that moment, Salua came down. He drew a knife and charged at Orphaned. Magic tried to stop him, but was thrown aside. Salua then engaged Orphaned in combat, realizing Orphaned was only pretending to be immobile. After a brief skirmish, Salua suddenly revealed that he knew Orphaned's former name. Meanwhile, Cleom had led the forest rangers to the area. However, they hesitated to enter because the church had instructed them to stay away from this place. Consequently, Cleom decided to enter alone. Salua knew of Orphaned because 5 years ago, Orphaned was promised to be Childman's successor due to his talents. Salua then drew his own sword. Orphaned realized Salua was a Grim Reaper, an assassin employed by the church faction, tasked with eliminating those who opposed the church. Both were unsure why their adversary was in this desolate place. No answer forthcoming. Cleom knocked Salua unconscious to save time. She had the forest rangers with her, so Orphaned asked her to clear the way for him. She refused, knowing he would leave her behind. However, Fina arrived and manipulated Cleom to follow Orphaned's instructions. She then asked Orphaned to take the unconscious people from the area while she decided to stay behind and follow the villagers. She had known Salua was a Grim Reaper because she had once seen into his mind. She wanted Orphaned to save Salua because he was the only one in the village who had treated her kindly. Salua was there to assassinate the village chief, who was a former church member, but had fled here. Fina was brought here to sue Fenrir, but the village chief had the villagers' trust, and they had actively been manufacturing guns to combat wizards, despite the royal decree banning firearms. She knew the village chief was using her to locate the heart of the forest and would dispose of her once he found it. Thus, she wanted to save the most precious people to her before something terrible happened. She wasn't afraid to die if it was her destiny, as she had made friends. Orphaned disliked her response and refused her request because she couldn't even escape from him, so she shouldn't try to act strong. Salua then woke up and Orphaned proposed a deal. He would spare him as long as Salua led him to the village chief. Meanwhile, Magic was with Fina to protect her. Orphaned and Salua then went to the house of the village chief. Orphaned wanted to uncover what the chief was plotting with the heart of the forest. Orphaned negotiated and offered the village chief the name of the person who was after his life. Salua realized Orphaned was betraying him and lunged at him, but Orphaned blew him away. The village chief drew his gun to continue firing but was dodged by Orphaned, who then disabled the gun with a countermove. The chief needed the power to overcome the dragon tribe. As he pulled the trigger, the gun exploded. The chief died, managing only to inform Orphaned that the church was hiding a terrible secret capable of destroying the continent. Realizing his task was done, Salua left to return home. Meanwhile, Cleone couldn't persuade the forest rangers. She decided to wait for her friends there. Suddenly, a small dog ran to Cleone. When the rangers tried to attack it, it jumped on her. They revealed it was Fenrir's offspring. Knowing Fenrir was near, they decided to flee. The villagers, discovering their leader dead, wanted Fina to lead them. However, Orphaned thought they should make their own decisions. They didn't listen and instead decided to follow Orphaned to force him to lead them to the heart of the forest. Fina and Magic ran out to see Orphaned being pursued and had to go help. Fenrir gave Fina a moment to leave before it would deal with the village. She split from Magic, while Orphaned was on the run. He was spotted but quickly subdued the man and took his gun. He then reunited with Magic, and they soon found themselves cornered on a rooftop. Salua arrived to pick up Fina, but she refused to leave as she still had things to do. Orphaned revealed he could use a teleportation spell, which was risky and could only move them 10 meters. They decided to try it and successfully teleported to the adjacent rooftop. They temporarily escaped and met up with Cleone when suddenly Fenrir arrived. It began to destroy the village, forcing Orphaned's group to intervene. Orphaned threatened Fenrir with its offspring, but it was indifferent, revealing it could use resurrection magic. Fenrir had originally given the village a chance by sending Fina, a resurrected corpse, to oversee it. It was enraged by the village chief's scheme to tamper with the heart of the forest. Now that the chief was dead, and the villagers continued his schemes, Fenrir felt compelled to punish them severely. Orphaned refused to let the wolf wreak havoc, so he attempted to stop it at all costs. He fired several shots, but they had no effect. The wolf retaliated with a mental attack, but Orphaned quickly countered it with a spell. Knowing the wolf's power operated through eye contact, Orphaned realized that limiting its vision would neutralize the threat. He then instructed Magic to use light refraction, similar to how he had previously spied on Cleone. Magic created a refractive field around the wolf, allowing Orphaned to press the gun against it and trigger the gun to explode. The wolf collapsed but decided to spare Orphaned and his group this time, recalling a promise made to Cheldman. Although the wolf was still set on dealing with the village, Fina approached. She possessed a part of its power and decided to sacrifice herself to protect the village. The wolf realized it could no longer control Fina and prepared to execute her, but Cleone intervened, holding up the wolf pup. She expelled Fenrir back to the forest. Fenrir warned them about disrupting the forest and cautioned that their freedom was not eternal. The next morning, the two dwarves emerged from hiding, assuming Orphaned had been incinerated by Fenrir. But Orphaned found them to remind them of their debt. Meanwhile, Fina and the villagers had moved on. She thanked Magic and Orphaned for helping her escape her servitude to Fenrir, expressing hope that Magic would become a great wizard. Orphaned's group then set off, with Magic still concerned about Fina but determined to become a wizard above all. Cleone then ran out, taking the wolf pup with her. Orphaned joked about having another mouth to feed. Along the way, Orphaned pondered a prophecy the headmaster once told him about his destiny to surpass his mentor, Cheldman. He woke from his reverie, skeptical about the memory he had just recalled. Soon, the trio finally saw the Tower Fang. Magic believed it was the place where he would truly become a wizard. Back at the academy, rumors started to spread about the murder of the Fifth Elder. If things continued this way, all the elders would soon be killed. The board was eager to urgently address this major case due to its implications for the safety of the Tower Fang, determined to resolve it by any means necessary, even if it required force. Fort, Childman's last student, noticed that things had started going awry ever since Childman had set out to find Azaleen. Titch was already waiting in Fort's room, inquiring whether Azaleen had truly been defeated. However, Fort wanted to resolve the Elder's murder case first. The suspect was described as having black hair and being quite thin, seemingly a wizard from the tower. Having heard all about encountering Orphan on the battlefield and Childman's disappearance, Fort suspected Orphan was the murderer, believing his actions against the elders were driven by vengeance. Meanwhile, Orphan was bathing the horses when he saw Magic being scolded by Cleome for mocking her cooking. She had now mastered using the wolf pup to attack. Orphan then encountered trouble with the forest rangers. Although they knew he was a wizard, they didn't want to hand him over to the church, knowing he would likely be killed, so they advised him to leave and pretended they hadn't seen him. As he was leaving, Orphan remembered he had forgotten his dragon-shaped pendant. Just as he turned back, he found the ranger had been assassinated, and on the wall was his pendant with a message about the successor. The other two were unaware of what he was contemplating. Suddenly, their carriage was explosively shot at. Magic and Cleome noticed someone in the sky. Magic fired a spell at him, but the attacker returned a stronger blast. However, the wolf pup blocked the attack, protecting them both. Orphan, unharmed by the recent attack, turned back. He called the attacker a brat, so the attacker used a teleportation spell, appeared right in front of him, and fired a crystal spell. Magic and Orphan scrambled, while Cleome was still protected by the wolf pup. Orphan realized this attacker was stronger than him, but not as strong as the wolf pup. He told Cleome to be careful and hold on to the wolf pup tightly, unsure how the attacker could use Childman's teleportation spell. The attacker suggested Orphan might not really be the successor as rumored. Orphan realized this was the man who had killed the ranger. He engaged in combat, but was completely outclassed. Cleome let the wolf pup attack, but the attacker caught it and turned to attack Cleome. The attacker unexpectedly missed his shot and was hit by a knife thrown by Tish. She announced that she would take Orphan away, prompting the attacker to reveal his face, shockingly similar to Orphan's from 5 years ago. Tish then escorted Orphan's group back to the Tower Fang, and along the way, she was introduced to the two siblings and vice versa. She was surprised by how much Orphan had changed over the past 5 years. At the gate, Titch had the guards check their identities to ensure Orphan's group could enter safely. Orphan was curious about the tight security and learned that there had been several recent assassinations. In this city, wizards from the tower generally held high positions and authority. The residences granted to these wizards were essentially mansions, as evident from Childman's house. Meanwhile, the elders suspected the church's involvement in these incidents. Orphan was aware that Childman's and Fort's information network should have already identified the assassin. Fort was certain it was Orphan. At that moment, Fort called Harsha. He had found a bloodied sword in the old town and suspected that Childman had been killed. The likely culprits seemed to be Azaleen and Orphan. Everyone believed Azalee, the dragon, had been defeated earlier, so Orphan was naturally a suspect. Tish then brought Orphan's group to her private home. Most wizards lacked families, as no one wanted to send their children to a school like the Tower Fang, known for its high student mortality rate. Inside, Orphan encountered his old cat, which had completely forgotten him. Tish still collected various oddities, and she had prepared rooms for all 3 of them. Magic and Cleome took the opportunity to look through Orphan's childhood albums. He shared that he, Tish, and Azaleen were like family, and coincidentally, they ended up studying together in the same class. Later, Tish went out to inform the tower that Orphan was not the murderer, but his reluctance to return to the tower angered her, as she found both him and Fort equally stubborn. That night, Orphan knew he needed to discuss Azalee and Childman's story with Tish. He expected Tish to be furious once she heard it. Suddenly, his own voice echoed, and he approached a fountain, where he encountered his own past version, the one who bore his face from 5 years ago. The shadowy figure identifies himself as Krylan, the ghost from Orphan's past who bore his old name. Tish, in the meantime, informs Fort that the culprit resembles Orphan from 5 years ago, and that the attacker's power could rival that of the rumored successor. Back with Orphan, Krylan claims he is the true embodiment who learned everything from Childman, from magic to assassination skills. the latter being the only aspect Orphan did not inherit from Childman. Krylancello sees himself as the successor Orphan was meant to be, the virgin Orphan abandoned when he took the name Orphan. Krylancello reveals he serves them, and he believes Orphan knows who they are. After completing his mission, Krylancello departs, with Clyome witnessing everything. The next morning, Tish hasn't returned, and Orphan has lost his appetite. The true identity of this Krylancello weighs heavily on him. Clyome decides to seek someone to help Orphan. 5 years earlier, when Orphan left to search for clues about Azali, he reluctantly became a moneylender to survive. Now he suspects that Azalaine, whom he had spared, might be the one who created and directed Krylancello to assassinate the elders. He then reunites with Tish, who introduces him to her 2 students. As Orphan introduces himself, the kids reveal that the previous night, 2 dwarves came begging for food, claiming to know him. Unsure, they lock the dwarves in a storeroom. Recognizing them, Orphan goes to find the dwarves. He encounters them and suspects they were freeloading, but he's willing to overlook it if they help him with something. Meanwhile, Tish is looking at a birthday gift from her students and recalls that years ago, a mysterious person gifted her a similar angel-shaped plaque. Back then, the group's rule was that any outsider wanting to celebrate a birthday had to go through friends, but Tish never knew the sender. She often practiced with her 3 siblings, Orphan, Hartia, and Comicron. She notes that while Hartia is very strong, he always loses to Orphan. Comicron excels in healing magic, but is otherwise weak. Fort, on the other hand, possesses an information network second only to Childman's, and his magical prowess is surpassed only by Childman and Azali. Orphan was often summoned by Childman for individual training sessions, which puzzled Tish as she couldn't understand why the naive Orphan was chosen as Childman's successor. While pondering in the library, Ford approached her. He had long harbored feelings for Tish, which remained unchanged despite her rejections. Tish still believed that Orphan was being overly pampered by Azaline, thus not realizing his full potential. However, Ford informed her that Orphan was intentionally limiting his abilities during their practice sessions to avoid injuring her. This prompted her to call Orphan out for a serious fight. Unaware of what was happening, Orphan was taken aback when she attacked him first. She revealed that she knew he was holding back during training, so she wanted to see his true capabilities. Orphan then dodged Tish's attack and retaliated, sending her flying back, making her realize that if he were serious, he truly suited the title of successor. Back in the present, Orphan visited Tish to inquire about a few things. Upon seeing the mysterious gift from years ago, he recognized the handwriting on the note as Comicron's. Meanwhile, Clyome and the 2 dwarves were tasked with investigating the identity of the assassin for Orphan. Tish informed him that the tower was nearly at a standstill. Comicron had died in battle. Hartia was working as a secretary in another town. Azaline had disappeared, and Master Childman had been missing for 2 months. Orphan was aware of what had happened, but chose not to discuss it yet. Tish also revealed that the situation was escalating as Fort had been poisoned in his tea. He realized it but kept it secret, wanting to control the tower, the way Childman once did. At that moment, Clyome and the 2 dwarves were dining when a group in black approached. Krylancello revealed himself and used a sedative on Clyome and the wolf pup to take them away. Orphan knew he had to disclose the truth to Tish, so he informed her that the only people who could infiltrate Fort's network were himself or Childman. He admitted that he couldn't be the assassin as he was too clumsy to kill anyone, and Childman was unlikely to return. The 2 dwarves later informed Orphan that Clyome had been kidnapped and taken to Childman's mansion. Orphan realized that Krylancello was trying to lure him out. Magic wanted to accompany Orphan, but Tish refused. After the 2 argued, Orphan told them to be quiet, declaring he would go alone. Magic persisted in following and asked if Krylancello would harm Clyome. Orphan knew Krylancello wouldn't do so if he truly wanted to lure Orphan out. Deciding to end all ties with the past, Orphan resolved to save Clyome alone and then left by himself. Magic, wanting to follow, was informed by Tish's student that the tower had originally recruited Childman as a teacher to cultivate exceptional individuals for the court. Childman selected the most talented children, and people began to value Childman's children. Orphan was the most gifted and had inherited all of Childman's techniques and magic. However, his flaw was his inability to kill. When Orphan left, the tower feared someone might follow and draw him back, so they sent someone to tail him. It was rumored that Orphan had defeated this pursuer and left him to die, though the details were unclear. Despite this, Magic believed Orphan was not the monster they portrayed, so he chose to help him. Tish also followed. Meanwhile, Orphan had arrived at Childman's mansion. Childman had taught him that everyone has a vulnerability to exploit. Orphan's only known weakness was his reluctance to kill, but his assassin counterpart had overcome this flaw. Now, he faced a formidable opponent without weaknesses. Nevertheless, Orphan was determined to prove to Childman that an enemy without weaknesses could still be defeated. He then ascended and entered through the roof, where Krylancillo awaited him. The two unleashed spells, wreaking havoc on Childman's house. Orphan knew Krylancillo was created by Azalee, who wanted this version of Krylancillo defeated by Orphan. Only then could Orphan overcome his sole weakness. However, Krylancillo now had his own consciousness, and wanted to defeat Orphan, to be the only one beside Azalee. The two then engaged in close combat with knives, but still used spells. After a clash, Orphan cut Krylancillo's arm, and revealed he had devised 3 methods to defeat him. The one just used was one, but he knew it would not work again. The second method Orphan tried was to launch a blade, and then step on Krylancillo's foot to knock him down. However, Krylancillo countered with a spell, catching Orphan off guard. At that moment, Tish and Magic arrived and instructed the police to handle the situation. Orphan regained consciousness in the basement of Childman's house. Krylancillo came down to find him and revealed that Childman had passed on to Azaleen something called the Witch-Killing Machine. It was a humanoid figure that, once engraved with symbols, could be activated. Azaleen had been observing Orphan and remotely controlled the machine. Krylancillo then drew a sword, explaining that Azaleen had used it to cut the figure, transforming it into Orphan's likeness. Orphan then discovered Cleon nearby, paralyzed by a spell. Krylancillo knew Orphan wouldn't flee and leave Cleon behind. Thus, Orphan was forced to resort to his third method of attack. He charged, seized control of the sword, and launched a direct spell at Krylancillo. This was a move often used by Childman to discipline him. Without hesitation, Orphan broke the humanoid's neck, fighting with the mindset of being ready to kill. When he noticed Krylancillo bleeding without showing any human reaction, Orphan suspected he wasn't truly human. Meanwhile, Tish and Magic were slowly making their way in, unsure of Orphan's whereabouts. Krylancillo, still not dead, was determined to eliminate Orphan to become the only Krylancillo that Azaleen needed. The two unleashed their strongest spells at each other. Both sides continuously blasted powerful spells to repel the other, but ultimately, Orphan emerged victorious. Tish, realizing the battle was over, quickened her pace. Magic took the opportunity to grab an extra book to take with them. Orphan had defeated the humanoid and finally encountered Azaleen. She revealed that she hadn't killed the elders. It was the humanoid that had developed its own personality. She retracted the humanoid and informed Orphan that she still had tasks to complete. She noticed Orphan looking at her with a menacing gaze, but he remarked that it was ironic how someone so adept at eliminating obstacles feared his look, yet she couldn't kill him. The story about Orphan leaving someone to die was true. Azaleen believed that Orphan was the only one Childman had fully trained to counter white magic by homing his mind. Orphan was told by Childman to control Azaleen, the only one proficient in white magic in their class, but he never believed Childman thought that way. He had always wanted Azaleen to live peacefully somewhere. He tried to persuade her to return to the light, to the home that Tish had prepared for them. However, Azaleen wanted Orphan to follow her, because he was the only one who could truly understand her. She believed that next time, Orphan would have an answer for her. Seeing Cleon about to wake up, Azaleen decided to meet Orphan another time. She wasn't ready to face Tish, so she left. Tish and Magic then arrived and reunited with Orphan. That evening, Orphan was treated for his injuries, but he ended up vomiting everything he had eaten, courtesy of Cleon's cooking. Cleon had to hide outside the gate to avoid a beating from Orphan. Outside, Azaleen gave her some advice on making mistakes, dispensing some philosophical thoughts, which I assume you might not want to hear, so let's skip that. Meanwhile, at the tower, an assassin broke in and killed several more people. Orphan was packing to leave soon, but as he was about to leave his room, he encountered another assassin. The assassin recognized him. Just then, Cleon and Magic came up, so he prepared a spell to protect them, but the assassin managed to escape. Right after that, Cleon offered Orphan a cake she had made. He adamantly refused to eat but ended up having to spit it out while talking. Tish had to intervene, urging them to be quiet as she had been working nonstop for 2 days without sleep. The next morning, Orphaned said he wanted to leave after getting magic enrolled at the tower. He had dealt with the assassin situation and mentioned that Krylon Solo was actually a humanoid, but he claimed not to know who had activated it. Of course, Tish realized he was lying, but he still refused to disclose anything about Azaleen. Tish informed him that she had secured his return to the tower, so he could stay without any pressure. However, if he remained stubborn, he would have to face the assassins from the tower. But Orphan acknowledged that what she said had happened. Meanwhile, Magic was sitting, reading a book he had found at Childman's house, which Cleo mistook for her diary. Cleo mistakenly thought she was holding her diary when in fact Orphan had to remind her that the diary was in her other hand. Orphan then announced he would be taking Magic to the tower. Cleo wanted to go too, but Orphan refused, so Tish decided to have her 2 students take Cleo on a tour instead. While sitting and admiring the tower fang, the 3 encountered the 2 dwarves selling tower-shaped pillows. Cleo threatened to tell Orphan, causing the dwarves to sulkily move elsewhere to sell. Tish's student explained that the tower was managed by the upper echelons, with the classrooms below. Childman's class was the most favored and had a significant influence on the upper levels, which led to resentment from other classes. Childman's disappearance had disrupted the tower's order. Meanwhile, as Orphan and Tish were escorting Magic back to the tower, Orphan asked Tish if she had made any enemies. She hadn't, so Orphan realized that if they were ambushed, it would be because of him. No sooner had he spoken than their carriage was attacked. Orphan used a spell to protect the carriage and dispelled the smoke from an incoming smoke bomb. The attackers quickly surrounded them, and Orphan recognized them as followers of the dragon cult. He took them on alone and subdued them all. He questioned one about the reason for the attack, suspecting it was revenge for an incident in the forest. But when they accused him of slaughtering their people, he denied having killed anyone. Suddenly, one of their heads was severed by an emerging figure. It was the same person who had killed others in the tower earlier. This man, introducing himself as Hydrant, was known to Tish as someone from the upper levels, and she assumed he had come to escort them. It seemed he was the one Orphan had left for dead in the past. Orphan then reached the tower fang and was privately summoned by Fort's secretary. Fort showed no surprise upon seeing Orphan and wanted to get straight to the point about the recent secretary. He was a student from the Yor class, a rival to Childman's class. The assassin Orphan encountered the previous night was from this Yor class, as was Hydrant. Hydrant had sent a report saying he had found a group of dragon cult followers near the border, had slaughtered them, and was now targeting the survivors. Fort requested to meet only with Orphan, because he knew Tish would be furious to hear this news. Orphan was no exception. He went to Yor's classroom to find him, and Yor was already waiting. When Orphan arrived to look for Hydrant, Yor informed him that Hydrant was no longer a student there. Yor acknowledged Hydrant's actions, but had turned a blind eye, considering his role merely to clean up the dead. Orphan threatened him not to harm Tish or Magic, otherwise he would target Yor. Yor was aware of Orphan's capabilities, but advised him not to make an enemy of him, especially since Childman was not there to control them. Orphan then left, and Tish was still upset because Fort had refused to meet with her. However, Magic was happy to have submitted his application to the tower. Meanwhile, Cleo had just returned when she encountered the assassin from the previous night. Orphan arrived to find Cleo injured and unconscious at the gate. Tish's 2 students informed him that an assassin had attacked her. Orphan suspected it was the same person he had encountered the night before. Orphan wanted to pursue, but Tish stopped him, warning that further disturbances would not be overlooked by the elders. Tish decided to go after them herself. Orphan didn't want her to face danger, but she insisted she wouldn't lose to a coward who attacked a woman and fled. She was determined to protect her home. Orphan reluctantly took Cleo inside for treatment. Tish then encountered the assassin and realized he was luring her. She didn't want to take risks, but also didn't want to lose his trail. Orphan went to look for Tish. Cleo wanted to join, so he'd instructed Magic not to let her follow him. Orphan then went alone, while Tish was lured by the assassin to her old family home. The assassin drew her to a dilapidated house, where he and his accomplices ambushed her. She realized the remaining person was Hydrant. He had hoped to confront Orphan there too, but knew Orphan would eventually come. Tish didn't think she would lose and launched a fire spell in defense. Orphan, seeing the flash of light, quickly ran to the scene. Tish was overwhelmed by the two, and lost 2 fingers to Hydrant's blade. Just when the situation seemed dire, Azaleen arrived to save her. Hydrant was surprised to see Azaleen still alive, and they fled. Azaleen treated Tish and left before Orphan arrived. Orphan brought Tish back home, and she thought she heard Azaleen's voice in his, confusing her in her dazed state. Orphan knew what had happened, but let her believe her assumption. He told her that Cleom was stable, but though her fingers had been reattached, the nerves couldn't be repaired, rendering them practically useless. He wanted to make those responsible pay, but Tish urged him to stop being reckless. She preferred losing her fingers over losing him. She wanted Orphan to report to Fort, trusting that Fort would inform the upper echelons to deal decisively with the Yor class. She lamented that if Comicron were alive, he could have healed her hand. After Comicron's departure, everyone had gradually left, leaving only her and Fort at the tower. Therefore, she implored Orphan not to leave her alone again. Orphan later met Azaleen in the courtyard, and they talked. She informed him that Yor had initiated the final steps of their plan. They had dealt with several elders who opposed them, and conversely, she had to handle some elders aligned with Yor. She revealed that Yor was attempting to seize control of the tower. Their goal was the map of the Browning family. 1,000 years ago, one of the gods of the world tried to kill the other gods to unify and become the Magic King. The church deemed the Magic King heretical, but few knew that he had secretly left behind a book, a map leading to power, passed down through the Browning family. However, it had disappeared early from the family and ended up with followers of the dragon cult. The last known holder of the book was believed to be Childman. This may sound familiar as it relates to the book, Magic Found at Childman's House. Azaleen knew the book would attract the Yor, but they also needed it, so she was determined not to let them have it. She knew the Yor would act tonight. She planned to deal with the assassins and left the task of assassinating Lord Yor to Orphan. He knew he had no choice but to follow Azaleen's plan. As for the book's whereabouts, she revealed that magic was holding it. Azaleen then gave Orphan the power to teleport and left. Orphan was frustrated by how easily Azaleen manipulated him. Upon entering the house, he discovered that Cleom had overheard everything. Orphan then asked Magic where he had found the book, learning that Azaleen had intentionally arranged for Magic to find it. Afterward, Orphan asked both of them to accompany him, because he knew he needed their help. He was straightforward. They would go to the tower and confront those responsible for harming Tish. Orphan and the siblings then arrived outside the tower. Cleom had a rough understanding of the plan, while Magic felt guilty, thinking his handling of the book had led to Tish's injury. However, Orphan reassured Magic that he was not to blame, as the confrontation with the Yor class was inevitable. Now, their way in was over the wall. When physical entry wasn't possible, it was time for a wizard to do what they do best. As they made their way inside, Orphan explained that he had chosen to attack first, because it would be unexpected. Normally, attackers would exploit the moment of the night watch's shift change to escape. But he was sure that tonight they wouldn't venture out, knowing he was coming, though they wouldn't expect his siblings. Initially, he wanted to overcome his weaknesses and prove himself as the true heir. Inside, Orphan checked the guard room only to find it empty. Hydrant then attacked from behind, forcing Orphan to retreat. Orphan counterattacked, prompting Hydrant to call his allies, which made Cleom use her wolf to block the attacks. Noticing Hydrant's indifference to the presence of other guards, Orphan realized Hydrant considered it a Yor problem. Hydrant didn't care if Yor lived or died. He was solely focused on settling scores with Orphan. Orphan knew Hydrant blamed him for Tish's condition. While Hydrant was aware that Orphan had concealed Azaleen's survival, Orphan then drew Hydrant into an old training room, a place where he and Childman's class had practiced together. Hydrant was still bitter about a scar Orphan had given him 5 years ago. At that time, Orphan had planned to join the court when Hydrant had tried to bring him back, as the elders needed someone at the tower capable of confronting Azaleen. They needed Orphan, the one Childman had taught everything. But Orphan had refused and shot Hydrant in the face. Both still haunted by each other, Orphan and Hydrant decided to settle their long-standing grudges there and then. Orphan used a spell to throw Hydrant upwards and fired a beam of light at him. But Hydrant quickly retaliated and charged. Orphan dodged to the back, forcing them back into hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, Cleom encountered another opponent. This enemy realized that Orphan's group had been separated. He decided to deal with Cleom first, before finding Magic. Angered by his underestimation, Cleon became furious. Just as he recognized Cleon's capabilities, he was disarmed by her wolf. Magic woke up in an unfamiliar place and faced an accomplice of Hydrant. When the man attempted to kill Magic, he fled, but dropped the book, which the man retrieved. Left with no choice but to fight, Magic raised a magical shield and figured out how to use a beam of light, though his aim was off, allowing the enemy to retaliate. Somehow, Magic learned to teleport, dodging the attack, but the powerful move drained all his strength. Fort intervened, chasing the assailant away. Magic wanted to reclaim the book, but Fort insisted Orphan handle it, taking Magic as his apprentice from then on. In the meantime, Orphan, using his superior combat skills and techniques, overpowered Hydrant. As he was about to further disfigure Hydrant's face with fire, Cleon arrived. She informed him she had knocked out an assassin with help from her wolf, and Orphan was relieved he had brought her along. Together, they went to confront War. He had obtained the book and confessed to his crimes. Orphan then told him to check again, revealing that it was Cleon's diary, slightly altered by Orphan to resemble the real book. Fort entered and accused War's class, but War doubted Fort's authority. Orphan showed him an indictment with Hydrant's pre-signed confession, revealing Hydrant's intent for revenge. Azaleen also appeared. Orphan realized Fort had known about his survival. When War lunged to attack Azaleen, Orphan used a lethal technique taught by Childman to incapacitate him. However, Azaleen advised Orphan not to finish off someone like War. Azaleen then cast a spell causing all of War's students to forget she was still alive. They were then arrested. Fort was surprised to learn that Childman had died. However, he vowed to take control of the place just as Childman had. Azaleen kept the real book with her, revealing that it contained secrets to prevent the world from descending into destruction. She decided to investigate it on her own, and told Orphan to look for her at the church if he wanted to find her. Thus, Azaleen continued her journey towards her own goals, and Orphan would continue his quest to uncover the mysteries of Azaleen's objectives. This marks the end of Part 1 of the film.